Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 173 of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Tom Hunyadi, and you may know me from my other show, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, my backwards traveler. He is Andy Nichols. Andy, what's going on, my friend?
Hanging in and continuing to celebrate a milestone year and a milestone birthday.
Absolutely. And as you can see, we've got a guest joining us today, and he is the author of the Time magazine version of Paul McCartney at 80, this brand new book, which came out back in early June?
Mid-June.
And yeah, mid-June, and it's been on the stands and it's been flying off the racks, and I've been seeing a lot of people posting pictures with this.
Different covers though too, right? When there are different covers on this too.
No, I don't recall.
It's only the one cover.
Oh, okay. Because I did see another time. I saw another time celebrating Paul at 80, and I didn't know if there was like a thing where they were doing multiple covers or not.
Maybe a little controversy here. I don't know.
It's news to me.
There was another black and white. There was Time. I saw it. I saw it in the supermarket like a week ago.
You sure it wasn't the Paul McCartney at 70?
No, it wasn't that one.
Or if not, maybe is it possible it was Life instead of Time?
Could have been.
Yeah, because I know Life did one too, didn't they?
They did, yes.
It could have been.
Yeah.
Lifetime. Yeah. It's close.
It's all the same.
Yeah. But anyways, we are being joined by author.
By me.
Yeah, yes. That's right. we are being joined by author Glenn Greenberg. And Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me on. This was a very pleasant surprise to be invited.
Yes, thank you for writing. So, obviously, the more written on McCartney, the better. I think in our world, So, thank you for doing this. And before we get to that, let's just do a little chat about you as a writer, your background, and where you came from in the writing world.
Well, my career, believe it or not, got started at Marvel Comics.
Yes, great.
Where I worked I worked there throughout the 90s as as an editor and as a writer. So I got to write Spider-Man, the Hulk, little bit of the X-Men, a little bit of Fantastic Four, Iron Man, all these characters that you're now seeing on the silver screen.
Right.
At one point or another, I touched most of them.
Awesome.
As a writer or as an editor. And then after that, I went into journalism for kids. I became the editor and head writer for Scholastic News, which was a weekly news magazine for kids from elementary school up until like middle school. You may have been readers when you were kids.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I remember picking up those things at any doctor's office I was
And then from there, I went on to their chief competitor, Time Magazine for Kids. So that got me into the world of Time Inc. And I worked on the same floor as Entertainment Weekly.
Oh, wow.
And I made connections there. And so when I left Time for Kids, and went in a completely different career direction entirely. I went into marketing, believe it or not. But my contacts that I made through my time at Time gave me an entree into the world of these publications called bookazines. And so I started doing stuff for Entertainment Weekly bookazines and People Magazine bookazines. And about two years ago or so, my contact at Time Inc., the guy who basically opened the door for me there, helped me get in the door at Time Inc. He had since left that company and was editing and publishing these bookazines through his own company. He called me up out of the blue and asked me if I'd like to, work on a bookazine. Like I said, I'd already done stuff for Entertainment Weekly and People. And I said, well, what's the subject matter? He goes, well, I have two. And I was like, wow, okay. He said, the first one is Tom Selleck. And my eyes kind of glazed over. Not that I have anything against Tom Selleck, but that would require a lot of research, which I wasn't inclined to do. And then he said, oh, and the second one is John Lennon. And I was like, what? Excuse me? What was that?
What?
He said, John Lennon. I said, all right, well, no to Tom Selleck, yes to John Lennon. And that started the ball rolling because the John Lennon book was to tie in with his 80th birthday and the 40th anniversary of his passing. So
safe to say you're not a Blue Bloods fan then, Glenn, right?
I'm afraid I'm not even a Magnum fan, unfortunately. And again, nothing against it.
Nice.
It just I was probably watching other shows when Magnum PI was on. But that started the ball rolling with these bookazines. So the first one I did was John Lennon, and then I did one for Star Trek, which is another passion of mine.
My wife's a Trekkie. My wife's a Trekkie too. So when I told her you did some, writing for Star Trek, she was like, "Ooh, really?"
Yeah, Star Trek is a big interest of mine. And the weirdest thing is that my editor Bob Durr didn't know I was a Beatles fan. Offers me John Lennon. Doesn't know I'm a Star Trek fan. Offers me the Star Trek book. So it's like he has this almost sixth sense for knowing what I'd be into, which is just incredible. And then I went on to do other bookazines, one for the history of Marvel Comics, which again perfect for me because I worked there for almost a decade. And then I did one for Raiders of the Lost Ark. I did one for Spider-Man, and I did one for Star Wars. So and then after I did the John Lennon book, I said to him, with my sixth sense, listen, if you end up doing one for McCartney, please keep me in mind because his 80th is in a couple of years. So for those 2 years after I finished working on the John Lennon book, I was always like formulating in my head, well, what would I do if I were to do a McCartney book? Because it's got to be twice the content because Paul has lived twice as long as John. So how do I just... So how do I distill all that? What are the topics that I felt would need to be in there? And so when the time came where he got the green light to do John Lennon, he got the green light to do Paul McCartney. Boom, I was ready. And I sent him a proposed outline that he used as the basis for the outline.
Okay, well we'll get to that in a second. But when I found out that your background was in comics, I was really excited because 90s was a huge comic. I started collecting comics right about 85 myself, but I was a DC guy, not necessarily a Marvel guy. But I'm gonna have to seek out some of your stuff now and give it a look. But Andy,
Glenn, just talk about the bookazine concept as a publication, as a concept. I mean, you've seen there's Time does them, the New Yorker has them, Life has them. Then there's also bookazines by like no-name companies. So that are out there. You see them at Barnes and Nobles, you see them at bookstores. Distinguish really when did this format where bookazine by a major publication becomes viable, to do a side project like this? Is it something that's been is it been standard practice for the last 10 or 20 years? Is it new? I mean, I have tons, but I mean, how big has it been really in popular culture recently?
I mean, I became aware of them within the last 10 years. I couldn't tell you the history of the format, but I remember taking note of them when I was at Time Inc. Because they were all around the office, and if I'd see a particular topic that interested me, I would grab it because it was around the office. You could take them for free. So they would there were topics that were really off the wall that I thought wow, there was a whole bookazine devoted to the work of Stephen King, which I thought was incredible. And of course, they've done bookazines before about Star Wars, and they would do about Frank Sinatra or the Rat Pack, all of which were topics that I was interested in, so I'd grab them. But I would say, I started at Time Inc. about 2013, so we're going on 10 years now. Yeah, so I would say within the last 10 years, maybe a little bit more, is when this became a thing. And in some cases, if there's a particular topic, the publication has already done enough content that they could just cull together previously existing material.
Yep.
But for most of the ones that I've worked on, it's been almost 100% new material where I am writing almost everything. Every word in there is written by me. You know, there have been some exceptions where, like, you know, for example, in the McCartney book, there's one piece that I didn't write because it was pulled from the Time archives. But
now, was that your idea or was that the editor's idea?
That was the editor's idea. They do want to show that Time has a history of covering these topics.
Yeah.
And plus, it's an exclusive interview with Paul, which is hard to resist, you know, including that. It was on the occasion of his 50th birthday, so it's, you know, but still, it's a milestone, and it just made perfect sense to include it.
Gotcha. All right, give us a few minutes and talk about your history with the Beatles and solo catalog. I mean, were you introduced to the solo music first, then the Beatles, or vice versa?
Well, I have an older brother and sister. My older brother was the big Beatles fan, and so but there's such a distance in age between us that I knew about the Beatles. They were kind of like this very sort of mysterious entity, you know, for me. But my sister, who's a little bit closer to me in age, she loved the Monkees. So I loved the Monkees. And I would come home from school every day and watch the Monkees on television and listen to their albums. And then what happened was, excuse me, in 1977, my sister was working in a record store. Remember those? And an album came out called The Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. And I asked for it, and she got it for me. And I took it out of the sleeve and I put it on. And that was my first Beatles album. And for the next 9 years, I never looked at or listened to the Monkees again. I went all in on the Beatles. It was almost like a switch had been flipped inside of me. And from that moment on, I was all in on the Beatles. And it was that album, The Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. So after that, I started slowly, you know, I was getting these out. I was a little boy. I wasn't buying these albums on my own for the first few years. But you know, the next thing I knew, I had Meet the Beatles, and I had Sgt. Pepper's. And I had, when I got a little bit older and I had my own spending money, I think the first couple of albums I bought were Rubber Soul and Revolver, until you get to the point where, okay, I've got the entire US catalog. And then CDs came along, and not only did I like the format better, because I hated vinyl when all there was vinyl, you know. but not only was it a digital format, but also it was the British albums, the mysterious British, you know, set lists that I always wanted to like sort of experience, because that's the way that the Beatles had them. You know, that's the way the albums were supposed to be. And so naturally, I just jumped on the chance and bought every single Beatles CD as they came out, and read every book, especially, I mean, when John died, I mean, at the time that John died, the only thing that I wanted to know about the Beatles was, when are they getting back together? Because of course they got to get back together. Something like the Beatles, it can't just be over. They at some point they've got to get back together. And then John died, and that ended that dream. But that's when I started reading the books. And I think the first Beatles book that I ever read was Shout by Philip Norman. In retrospect, probably wasn't the best, you know, starter, just because of how wrong-headed so much of it was. And even at the time I knew it was, but I just couldn't put my finger on why. We can get into that if you want. But then I read The Beatles Forever by Nicholas Schaffner, and then
great book.
Yeah. And then as I got older, I started reading more involved, detailed, very sort of deep dives into the history, into the relationships, both salacious and, like, you know, The Love You Make. Of course I read that, but I also read the more, you know, the recording sessions, the first Lewison book.
One. Yep.
So yeah, so that's really where all of the history really comes from. And I've never I mentioned before that I kind of drifted away from the Monkees once I discovered the Beatles. That never happened with the Beatles. I mean, I'm still as into them now as I ever was, and that carried over into the solo careers too.
Cool. Yeah, you said we're probably a little close in age because we didn't have that growing up with them where we saw the difference between with with the Beatles and then Sergeant Pepper, and it was just like, oh my God, what a difference. We got to experience that all pretty much all at the same time.
Exactly.
Right. So I for myself, I think we're a little bit lucky in that regards that we didn't really get that burnout of the Beatles when the older people that follow them at such an early age, and then they get to Sergeant Pepper and they're like, well, what's this?
Yeah, I know plenty of people out of that first generation, and they never got burned out. They were like, bring it on. They loved it.
Right, well, but it wasn't that poppy stuff that they were used to.
But they loved it. They loved it. Right. They loved seeing the change in real time. Yeah, it alienated some people, but a lot of people that I know that were there were like, this is awesome. Give us more.
Well, I can tell you that going from Meet the Beatles and Hollywood Bowl, which was all the hits and the poppy and the young mop tops, and then I remember putting on Sergeant Pepper and getting to side. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I was like, I still remember how I felt about it. I thought it was interesting and all that. And then flipping on to side 2 and hearing those opening strains of Within You, Without You, and it scared the crap out of me. I mean, I literally started crying. I was so scared, I was like 8 years old. So, so that's the, I wasn't able to sort of be carried along very gently, with like seeing them grow and change in increments. It was like, boom,
Right.
So there's a good part about that. And there's a bad part about that.
Cool. So the book, Paul McCartney at 80. I'm curious because we've got these 800, 1,000, 1,200 page bios.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to write a condensed bio on Paul McCartney?
I would say so.
You have to pick. Yeah. Okay, this has to be here. We have to talk about this, but this maybe we can delete that. Talk about that for a minute.
You've exactly nailed it. I mean, that really boiled down to it when I was working out the outline. Those are the questions that I was asking myself. And what it really boils down to is need to know versus nice to know. And when you're figuring this stuff out, you have to think about who the audience is.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. You're writing for mass consumption here. You're not writing for Tom and Andy. You're writing for the average person to learn, but to pick to an extent,
because the way that we approached the John Lennon book, which was, we wanted it to be a book for people who are just getting into the Beatles or John Lennon. We wanted it to be for people who kind of know the story but want a fuller picture, for people who knew the story but drifted away from the Beatles and want a sort of like a refresher course about them and about John, and to give just enough for the diehards so that they can at least respect the book and say, okay, this was written by somebody who knows what they're talking about, and there's some tidbits in there that I'm glad to see that other books didn't include or didn't cover. And that's the same approach that I took here.
Right.
Gotcha. I want to tell a story that people who aren't into the minutia. I'll give you, I'll give you for example. My wife loves the Beatles. She's not a diehard like I am. So when we were watching those 8 or 9 hours of Peter Jackson's Get Back, I was riveted, glued to the set. Right. And at one point, I think she said, how many versions of Don't Let Me Down do I have to listen to? And at one point, she just kind of, her mind started to wander, so, it can't be for them. You know,
Mhm.
it can't be for the audience that wants to hear every single version of "Don't Let Me Down" that they recorded during those
Right.
29
Right.
days. But you could at least show that you're aware of those recordings and maybe include a little tidbit that at least dispels a myth, or sets
Mhm.
the record straight, which a lot of the books either don't get into because they're not that well researched, or they just don't think it's important enough. So I tried to zero in on at least a few key points that I think, okay, let's dispel this myth. Let's address this. Let's include it. Maybe people have forgotten about this, or maybe
Right.
people feel that this is an important part of the story.
Right, because you do. I mean, the one famous one that you do talk about is McCartney just loves the story. He loves to tell the story that we weren't going to go to number one. We weren't going to go to America unless we had a number one. He
Yeah.
loves that story,
Yeah.
and you perfectly wrote about it, in the book, and that's the kind of stuff that I really like. Listen, he can have his nice story is all he wants, but when the facts is, it was already planned.
That's the important. And listen, it's like I included it because that's what the story
Right.
that Paul's been saying all these years. But here are the facts, and
Right.
I did that, to some extent in the John Lennon book as well. So that's so in terms of what to include and what to not include. Again, I sat and I had about a year and a half to think about all of this.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, how
when did
much
you
prep? Yeah,
officially
research.
when did you officially get the green light to go ahead with this project?
I got the official green light at the end of last year, so it would have been late December of
Okay.
2021, and I started writing it a couple of weeks later because I was finishing up the Star Wars book at the time.
Right.
So I wrapped that up and dove right into the McCartney book. So I started writing that, I would say, early January.
Okay. And then how familiar were you with with his bio? I mean, and how much research we talked about research. I mean, did you have to really dig deep to, the basics are there.
Right.
But like you said, you want to keep a couple of those tidbits, little bits of minutia here and there. I mean, how far did you have to, go for bits like that?
Well, keep in mind, a lot of that research came up when I did the John Lennon book from 2 years ago. So a lot of it was still fresh in my mind.
Fresh.
Yeah.
Right.
I went to all of the reliable, reputable sources that I used for the John Lennon book.
Mhm.
I'm not great off the top of my head with facts and figures and dates.
Right.
Right.
So
I had to go back for all of that stuff.
Mhm.
There were some things that I either, I didn't get wrong, but I was able to expand a little bit more that were in the John Lennon book, but I was able to go a little bit further or a little bit more fully in the McCartney book. But dates, places, names, chronological stuff. All of that was the stuff that I really, tended to focus on here because you're right. I know the bio. I know the story. I know what age he was when his mother died. I know what his mother died of. I knew what his father did for a living. I knew he had a brother. But you know what? I didn't know how many months apart he and his brother were. So that's something that I had to look up. I knew stuff like in general, like what his relationship with Brian Epstein was. But I had to go back to the research to get it in the facts about it, for accuracy.
Right, and I do like some of the stuff you put in there. It's just like the fact that you put in there. He was a little bit of a bad boy. I mean, people talk about Lennon being this, the bad boy rebellion, but Paul not showing up for that signing for Brian. I mean, that took some cojones. That was just So he's a little bit of a bad boy too, and the whole nailing of the condom thing too in Hamburg.
He always was. He always had that image.
He was a bit of a diva too. He was a bit of a diva.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. More into the writing. Where did you? What story did you? It's just a basic bio. Does that really what you wanted to do? Just like you said, you're just going towards the the kind of casual fan, right?
Mhm.
It's not really, going to the hardcores like Andy and I, or even, I mean, would you consider yourself a hardcore, fan?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Mm.
I'm hardcore.
Right.
You know,
Beatles and solo.
for some of them, yeah. I mean, I would say for McCartney, I'm a hardcore fan. John to a lesser degree, and George and Ringo, I'm more casual.
Okay.
But Paul was always my favorite Beatle, except for a few years when John died. All of my focus shifted to John.
Right.
And so for a few years, I was like, I was like a little bit John obsessed. But over the years, as I did explore the solo material and just their lives, just their biographies and everything, I found myself drifting back to Paul.
Right.
So
Yeah.
in terms of, I guess, yeah. I mean, you could term this bookazine as sort of a biography. I didn't see it as such, because it's not a straight biography. I saw it more as like an overview of his life and his career. I might be splitting hairs a little bit, but I think of a biography as like a 900-page tome
Right.
that tells his entire life and every facet of it, or as much of as much of every facet as you can possibly get. This is, I wouldn't say McCartney for dummies. I wouldn't call it that.
Right.
But it's sort of it's the highlights. It's the highlights, and it's the general story of one of the most important figures of the last century. I think with the John Lennon book, the biggest contrast is the format, in that with the Lennon book, we kind of broke it down a little bit into themes. So you had, the boy from Liverpool, and then you had, the Beatlemania. And then once Beatlemania comes, it's like, who am I? Like what am I? What the world thinks of me as, or who am I? And then there was an entire chapter devoted just to his relationship with Yoko. And then there were the solo years, and then we did a section on what the hell was going through his killer's mind. Why Lennon? Why did this guy fixate on Lennon? So it was a little bit more modular, I think, the Lennon book. This one, just by virtue of the fact that, again, you're dealing with twice the material, twice the lifetime. And so I think that in and of itself lent itself to a more straightforward, less modular treatment, just because, there's just so much to write about. I mean, with the John Lennon book, we were able to do sidebars. I did a quiz. It was like, it was, there's no room for that here. It's just like,
I definitely see that. I mean, again, you're looking at, 40 more years than, unfortunately, I mean, John didn't get that, unfortunately. I want to talk about the photos in that you get in the book. I mean, now, is these a slew of photos that Time magazine already owns, or do you have to go out and look for photos, from other? Did you have to, get permission from photographers?
Getty, right? Doesn't Getty own most of them?
I'll be honest with you. I was not involved in that aspect of the book.
Okay.
My role was strictly
just a writer,
writing
as the text. So I'm sure that some of it, came from the Time archives, and I'm sure that they had a deal with Getty or the other photo providers. My only involvement in terms of the photos is, once the book was designed and I was able to see the whole thing laid out, I was able to, through my expertise, be able to look at a photo and let them know if the year was wrong.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's how much of an obsessive I am. So I could look at a photo and literally say, oh no, Linda didn't have that hairstyle after 1969, and that kid, that's not Heather and Mary, that's Heather and Paul's half sister Ruth.
Right. Yep.
And even the photo house that they got the photos from got that wrong. So that was kind of like, I was like like almost like a stopgap right before publication. I was like, no, that caption's not right. Or, it's like, oh yeah, that's Paul in India getting his face painted, when he was with the Beatles in India. But
Yeah.
the guy painting his face, that's Mike Love of
Brian
the Beach
Wilson or
Boys.
Mike Love. Yeah, Mike Love's
Right.
there. Yeah.
We should mention that in the caption. So that
Yeah.
was kind of like my only involvement really with the photos.
Oh, interesting. Hey, listen, any bookazine that mentions Downrier's Law is geared. That's hardcore. That's a hardcore fact nugget right there. So to your point of having a little bit in there, not the average Joe McCartney fan is not going to know that Downrier's Law was a soundtrack film that MPL did, and you mentioned it. So yeah, nice job.
Yeah. Very cool. Let's talk about some of the stuff that, throughout the book. One that I've always been fascinated of is just the Paul and Linda marriage working relationship. And how they were able to keep this relationship so successful. I mean, you could call them in a way a power couple early in their career. I mean, here's Linda, an up-and-coming famous photographer. Here's Paul, probably the world's most famous bachelor playboy at the time, if you will. And then all of a sudden you see just him stopping this playboy lifestyle and like almost like when you slam on the brakes, and then now he's a family man. What did Linda possess that Paul was able to just hit the brakes on that playboy lifestyle? Then all of a sudden he was just bam, a family man. Really interesting.
Well, I mean, we only have what Paul has said on record. I mean, obviously I'm not a mind reader, so I don't, I don't know the full extent, but he and she just clicked. And I think a lot of it had to do with they were friends more than anything else. I mean, they were genuinely friends. He found her attractive. He commented that he found her very physically appealing,
attractive,
he seemed to fall in love with her daughter. That was very important to Linda as much as it was important to Paul. And they just clicked. Yep.
Yeah. You got some of the most famous photos, from Paul and Linda in here. I mean, I've always liked that one. And here's the one you were talking about too, with Ruth there, so yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting, relationship and how they were able to keep it, going.
I mean, I might take some heat from some of the Lennonistas for saying this, but this is my observation, is that Paul and Linda had the marriage that John and Yoko were presenting to the public, especially like in the fall of 1980. How John and Yoko basically tried to pass themselves off as the greatest love romance of the 20th century, of the last 100 years, and you had people like Elliot Mintz, perpetuating that story.
Yeah,
he still does. But the thing is, and back then, I mean, I bought it hook, line, and sinker as much as anybody. But now we know, it wasn't this idyllic marriage. Paul, John,
rosy, as rosy as but the machine goes on. But now there's been enough time that's passed. There's been plenty of books written, and I think we know that the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Well, we know that they weren't monogamous. I mean, Yoko was involved with Sam Hevitoy, and John was still involved with May Pang up until around 1978. So it wasn't this, perfect, monogamous, wonderful. I mean, look, whatever worked for them is fine. I'm not judging their relationship. I'm just going on the story that they were presenting to the world.
At the world, here's this sanitized, lovey-dovey couple.
Exactly.
Right.
But it seems to me that that's the marriage that Paul and Linda had.
Right. What they were perpetuating, Paul and Linda really had, but they didn't really go out and try to flaunt it as much.
Exactly. And, they were the ones that I mean, not one rumor, not one whisper throughout their entire marriage of any infidelity. I mean, they were completely devoted to each other. I mean, Linda very clearly made Paul priority one. I mean, she was, being his wife and the mother to his children, that was her priority.
She
And
pretty much gave up her photography career for him.
to an extent, yes.
To an extent, yeah, to an extent, right.
yes. And she was very protective of him. And she, was sometimes
she knew how much the Beatles meant to him. So,
Yeah.
To come out of that, and as you talk about in the book, be there for him and support him coming out of that. She knew that that's what he needed at that point in time. And she sacrificed herself and her own career, like Tom says, for him coming off of that.
And even beyond that, throughout the Wings era, when people would try to get to Paul to take advantage of him or get in with him, she was the guardrail. She was the one to sort of put up a barrier between Paul and just anybody. She was very protective of him. She wasn't out to make herself a star, and out to elevate herself riding on his coattails,
right?
Which
but she handled herself
says,
well, though.
I'm not in the band because I'm the best keyboard player. I'm in the band because I'm his wife,
right? And he wants me there,
right.
And that was the key thing,
And she's got a great personality, and you see her in all these interviews throughout the 70s, and she seems like she's been doing it. She seems like she's been doing these interviews, and she's very outspoken at times and very playful, and she seems like she's been doing it for decades.
Yeah, I mean, she was just a straightforward person. One of the most valuable resources that I had when I was writing this book was the 1984 Playboy interview that she and Paul did. This was when they were promoting "Give My Regards to Broad Street." Right. And she was probably more forthcoming than she should have been, because she said a couple of things that came off, kind of harsh in print, but I love the honesty behind it.
Did she talk about how Paul's like actually playing with real musicians now or something like that in that one?
Kind of.
And the Wings,
yeah, that was the one where she spoke a little too freely on that one.
Right.
She said that something along the lines of, he's finally working with musicians who are of his caliber. That the Wings musicians were fine, but they were not nearly at Paul's level.
That's really a pity. That's a pity. That's a shame, because as we now know, those guys were awesome musicians.
Unless she was talking about herself, then I don't think she.
Well, but you also have to keep in mind, context is very important. And at that time, I believe Denny Lane had just come out with, or he had cooperated on a book.
And then he really badmouthed Paul.
Badmouthed Paul.
The Wings members were probably leaving a bad taste in their mouth.
Yes.
We won't mention the author's name.
No.
I think I know who you're referring to. I won't say
Don't even say it. Don't even say it. We all know who we're talking about here. Don't even mention it.
Needless to say, none of his work was part of my research.
Right. Very good.
But seriously, but that I think that they were at the point where they had taken it on the chin enough times that Linda saw it as an opportunity to just sort of bite back a little bit.
Right.
That was the same interview where Linda came out and said, she wouldn't go into details, but alluded to the fact that now that John was gone, and for any kind of Beatles related matters, they had to deal with Yoko, because she was essentially their business partner now. It wasn't easy.
Right.
No.
Right. No, it was not. You mentioned the squeaky clean type of relationship where you don't get any hint of infidelities or anything like that. There was the apparent cassette tape that he bought back in 2012, where apparently they had some kind of argument. Have you heard about this, Andy?
Yes, I have. I saw this online a couple of days ago. He paid like a couple $100,000 pounds,
200,000,
to get this tape out of somebody's hands, where there was some kind of not really what else do we know about that?
I have to do some more research onto that.
This was an argument between Paul and Linda,
that was recorded. Yeah,
right.
So
and he paid a lot of money to get it out of, and the only other time I've ever heard of that is him kind of paying also the money, or trying to get where they isolated her tracks on Hey Jude.
Yes.
and her voice was just solo. I know, and he did
Right.
a lot to get that tape out of circulation as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
And Howard Stern played it. So yeah, I know about that one. Listen, all I can say is they were married for 29 years.
Right.
I dare anybody to buy into the notion that over those 29 years they didn't have any arguments. Every married couple has an argument, and you know what? What things are said in the heat of anger that you immediately regret. But he's Paul McCartney, and who would want that kind of stuff out there? Especially when you're of the stature of Paul McCartney. So yeah, I don't know anything about this, but it doesn't surprise me that maybe at some point in their career they had an argument.
Of course they did.
And why would he want it out there?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I totally get that. Totally get that. Success in the 70s. I mean, this guy was on top of the world for most part of the 70s. And you're looking at 6 #1 albums. You're looking at 6 #1 singles. He outsells the Beatles in the UK with Moleskine Tire. I mean, you're right. I mean, this guy was hotter than, I mean, just hot. I mean, Elton John might have been the only person hotter than Paul.
Of that generation of
that generation, right? Well, that decade. I mean, really.
Decade. Yeah,
it's one of the best second acts in showbiz history.
Right. And then you're also on top of that, you had the marriage, you had all the family traveling with that. I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think it was because the marriage was so strong that he was able to have all this success? And you did what? I mean, what's your personal belief on Paul's success throughout the 70s?
I think it was a very important. She gave him stability. Paul has admitted that he was pretty much suffering from a nervous breakdown after the Beatles broke up. It had become a 3 against 1 scenario, and these were his 3 closest friends. I mean, they were to an extent a family. And these were his closest musical collaborators, and they turned on him. He was pretty much all alone at this point. And so, yeah, he did have a nervous breakdown or something like it. She's the one who said, don't let them do this to you. You are Paul McCartney. Get out of that bed, stop drinking, and go out and do what you do best. Make music. Be who you were. Get out there and do music again. And that's what prompted him to do McCartney, the first solo album. And she was a major part of that album. And I think
I don't to cut you off, but even the ethos of the just get up and get a band and go play at universities is that it's more of that same ethos. Let's just go. Let's just get a band together and play wherever, because we're a band and we're just here and we're going to play because this is what I want to do. I'm a performer and I'm a musician and this is what I'm going to do. I don't care if anybody comes, but this is what I'm going to do.
And of course, that's what he wanted to do with the Beatles was just get up and go do small clubs and universities and stuff, just show up. And so he got to do it, except just not with the Beatles. But she was there every step of the way. She in some ways had the same kind of relationship to him as that John and Yoko had, and that John leaned on Yoko heavily the same way Paul leaned on Linda heavily. I think that was sort of a reflection of the two Beatles. Paul and John is they kind of had these same relationships where they were so dependent on the women that they were with, and they both ended up with women that were pretty darn strong, when all is said and done. And I think that she was very important to him. She gave him everything that he needed at that time, which was stability, a family, and undying support, which is what he was not getting in his other great love, which was the Beatles.
Right.
And so he found it with her, and that helped him get his confidence back. And that helped him weather through the storm when all the critics were, slamming him and he was getting blamed for breaking up the Beatles, which we know wasn't true. So, yeah, Linda was a key figure, and that marriage was a major reason why I think he was able to start over again. I mean, I think a lot of his success just has to do with his great talent and his ability to come up with songs that people just want to hear, you know.
Right.
But yeah, Linda was a huge part of it, because if
Right.
we know how deeply her death affected him, where he basically shut down for a year and then finally started to come out of it. I mean, imagine, if he had lost her back then, when he was on much shaky ground in terms of his security, in terms of what trying to put his life back together.
Right.
No, Linda, there's no undervaluing Linda.
Right. Yeah, you bring up some good points there. You mentioned the Howard Stern, playing, the Linda backing vocal.
Yeah.
And we laugh about it now,
Yeah.
but we also, as fans of Wings, admired what she brought to that band in those backing vocals.
Yeah.
That she helped create, with that band. It's phenomenal.
When I finally got to listen to Ram all the way through,
Right.
after years of being told, "Oh, it's a terrible album,"
I'm glad you brought that up, because we kind of similar in that, where we listen to other people,
Yeah.
and then we finally listened to those albums and we're like, what the hell were we thinking?
Exactly. I think she sounds great on Ram. I think their harmony vocals are delightful.
Right.
I really do.
Oh yeah.
Elton John thinks that he's on record as saying that he thinks they're some of the best backing vocals he's ever heard. So take it for what it's worth. But what was it, Jan? You write here in the book about Jan Wenner being staunchly in the Lennon camp. So of course he wasn't going to like Ram, which is don't even get me started with those people.
and that was, I will tell you that was something that I learned about while I was writing the book. And I was like, I got to get this in there. This is one of the things that I have to get in.
Right.
Finding out that just how in the tank Jan Wenner was for Lennon, to the extent of having his album reviewer change a positive review of the first McCartney solo album, McCartney, changing the review to make it more negative because Jan was personally offended by that Q&A that Paul included in the advanced press copies of McCartney, where he talked about that he didn't foresee him and Lennon working together, right? And all that. So Jan was pissed off about that Q&A, and he felt like now this album is a statement. It's not just an album. It is a statement. And so, therefore, it must be judged as such. And he had the review changed to make it negative. And I'm like, this is like finding out that there's no Santa Claus,
Right?
Because I was such a fan of Rolling Stone, and
he's a clown. So
let's switch gears up a little bit here, because listen, every McCartney Wings single throughout the 70s hit the top 40. I mean, that alone just is amazing. And then you go, 80 hits, and he gets the drug bust, and then later on that year, during the summertime, Coming Up is released, and it goes to number 1. So obviously that didn't really affect Paul's popularity too much. I mean, everybody knew he was a stoner or whatnot, a hippie stoner or whatever, So I don't think anybody was too surprised when that information came out. But then dealing with the death of Lennon right there, I mean, and then the comment he made, about it being a drag or whatnot. I mean, and then it just seemed like that right there, kind of like he put the brakes on again, and instead of being the man about town, which he was for the last 2 decades or a decade and a half. And all of a sudden now you see maybe a little bit more reclusive Paul, maybe not going out as much, maybe, being, more selective what he does.
Well, he uses this period here in your book, to open up part 3, Dark Times, setting the stage for the 80s and surrounding it with Lennon's death. And you've got the great picture there. with Paul outside of Soho Studio there on December 9th. So you set the stage for the 80s centered around Lennon's death, obviously, which is smart to do, and then kind of just going on from there and kind of just talking about Lennon's death, and then also talking about, basically how the 80s really was not a great period for him commercially. Commercially. We love the 80s stuff, but commercially, not so good.
But it starts off hot, though. He starts off pretty hot.
Yeah, but that's on the heels of Wings, though, really. I always thought. It's on the heels of Wings,
Maybe
that,
fair,
that,
but
that coming up is Wings. It's not Paul on his own. I mean,
well, true, but Tug of War is,
Right.
you
Well,
got the,
that's Tug of War.
Ebony and Ivory,
Tug of
number
War,
one. The
yeah.
album's number one.
Yes.
Right.
Tug of War aside, obviously, yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, a part of the reclusive thing, and Paul actually talked about this, I believe, in an early 80s interview, where part of his reclusiveness to a certain extent was due to the death of John Lennon, where he said a lot of us musicians were wondering if we'd ever do live concerts again, just because knowing what kind of people are out there. To take to just go up to a complete stranger and shoot him because he's a Beatle. It just so that I think that was part of it. I think also he still had a young child at home, his son James. I think he was still a little boy at that time, so they had to take that in consideration. Kid needs to go to school, so you can't be touring the world. So there was a little bit of that, but also the times were changing, and I don't look back at the 80s as a particularly great time for music in general. I mean, there are pockets here and there of stuff that I thought was pretty good. But Paul wanting to stay current and not seem old hat, so he would see what's going on at that time and try to dip his toes into it the same way Good Night Tonight, where he dabbled with disco, and so with the 80s, especially on albums like Press to Play, where he was getting into that sort of electronica and stuff like that, and it really kind of took him out of certainly his comfort zone, which isn't a bad thing, but I also think it wasn't necessarily a good fit,
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of Press. I bought Press to Play. I listened to it because it was the new Paul McCartney album,
Sure. Right.
I can tell you, I don't like Pipes of Peace at all. I find that a very difficult album to listen to just because it's so boring.
I hear you. I mean, even with the success of Say, I mean, which really couldn't help for whatever reason, didn't help that album do better than what it did.
Right.
I mean, number one, and then again, like you say, wanting to stay relevant, whether it's working with the hot producer of that time or working with the hot artist of that time.
Right.
I mean, he seemed to instead of starting trends, he's kind of almost now following trends.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a great story that I would have loved to include it in the book, but again, you only have so much room, and need to know versus nice to know. But there's this great story about when he was collaborating with Elvis Costello, where they were doing, I think, That Day Is Done. I think they were working on That Day Is Done, and they were trying to figure out the arrangement, and Paul suggested that they do kind of just to try it out, kind of capture that sound that the Human League had.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And Elvis Costello was so horrified and so angry that he walked out of the studio and walked around the block multiple times just to calm down, so that he could go back and deal with Paul on an unemotional level, but it showed that, he was aware of what was going on and he was willing to try stuff in that direction. But Costello was just no, that's not for us. That's not for me. I don't think it's for you either. And Elvis did try to pull him back to a more, old school type of sound.
Well, as we know, when Paul is challenged and pushed, generally you get a good result. And by the 80s, by that point, he probably had been surrounding himself with too many yes men and stuff. And finally, Elvis is there giving him the shot in the arm that he needs creatively to say, hey, look, man, change this up. Don't do this. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is he'd reached that point, and and there was a little bit of that in the Beatles also, but he'd reached the point where he would bring people in specifically because he said he wants to be challenged. He doesn't want to be surrounded by yes men. And then when you do challenge him, he says, well, how many number ones have you written?
Right. So it's like, it's this game. It becomes this game, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's frustrating in a way because he still had, some relatively good success in the 80s. I mean, look, No More Lonely Nights is a top 10. I mean, even Spies Like Us is a top 10, hit. I mean, and for him to just every once in a while live he'll do Coming Up, but he'll do he'll do Here Today, for every show he's doing that song.
But we're not getting any totally skip the 80s material
and to skip the 80s it's kind of frustrating in a way. I mean, even though there was some success,
a lot of that 80s material, as much as we love it, has that kind of adult contemporary sound to it production wise, and to reproduce that now, you just don't know how it would translate well live. No More Lonely Nights is a great song. We all love it, but how does that translate well now in a live setting? It's so slick. It's got that adult contemporary sound. A lot of that stuff does. A lot of the stuff on Flowers does even though live it worked then on that 89-90 tour. It's got that slick kind of production value, and I can see why it doesn't resonate to play live 30, 40 years later.
On the same token, when I saw him for the first time, I think it was on that 89-90 tour. I saw him at Radio City Music Hall, and he did Coming Up, but it was a completely different arrangement.
Yeah. It was like a reggae. It was like a reggae jam version.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So change the arrangements. If the song is good, and if you believe in the song, and I think that's part of the problem, but if you believe in the song, change up the arrangement a little bit and adapt it for the band that you've got. Strip it down. I mean, why doesn't he do My Brave Face? Great song. Yeah. And it has the credibility of being, one of those co-writes with Elvis Costello. And it's like, why not? No More Lonely Nights. You could do a simpler arrangement of it. And refigure it out. I think a lot of it is because he's at the point now where he wants to give the people what he thinks they want. And where you're going with this is he's undervaluing his own solo catalog. And I think to a certain extent he is doing that because I don't want to say that he has such a low opinion of the audience, but he doesn't want to disappoint the audience. And I think he underestimates the audience. I think that there are enough people coming to see him that either know these songs and would love to hear them. They would be like, oh my God, he's doing that. Or it's like, wow, I don't know that song. That's great. What is that? Oh, I'll go to Amazon and I'll buy that album,
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Very good point.
It's I've seen Paul about 5 or 7 times from 1989 to around 2012 or so. Okay. And there are songs that I have never heard him play that I understand he's playing them now, but it's like, well, thanks a lot, Paul. I'm not going to concerts anymore. Where were you 25 years ago? But throughout the entire decade and a half that I was going to see him in concert, he never did Junior's Farm. He never did Venus and Mars and Rock Show. He never did. I'm trying to think. What are the other? Sorry,
Call Me Back or was it Call Me Back again? Letting Go.
Listen to what the man said.
Yeah, he started dusting those off. In the last 10 years, he started dusting those off just as when you stopped going.
Thanks, Paul. But for the longest time, and it's sort of like, I was happy to hear some of the Beatles songs, but the other ones, it's like, I know this might be considered heresy, but I'd be more than satisfied if I never heard him play Yesterday again.
Well, he doesn't do it anymore.
He doesn't. So. He didn't do it on the Got Back tour.
Okay.
He didn't play.
Yeah. But
approve.
I understand where you're going with that. Absolutely. I mean, you could, us hardcore fans could say, well, I'd be happy if he never did Hey Jude again, but we'd be
Yeah.
fooling ourselves because,
Right.
That's the staple.
I would
Um,
love to hear him do Mull of Kintyre, like as you
oh,
mentioned.
yeah.
I'd love for him to break out, I know he's done it overseas. I don't
Right.
know if he's done it here in America.
Canada.
Canada.
No,
Yeah.
I was going to say I would love to see him do Come and Get It.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
did. He has done Come and Get It.
I know that he did it overseas. I've seen on YouTube videos, but
Right,
but overseas.
Right. Yeah. Not here.
Right.
Yeah.
Not here, so
Yeah.
there's no chance that I would ever get to see him do it.
Yeah.
On the same token, if you're going to do Beatles songs, I will say that I was particularly moved when I saw him in 2002, because I remember my wife was very pregnant at the time. When we went to see him in 2002, and he did Mother Nature's Son.
Yes.
And I got so choked up because I never thought I'd ever see him perform that live. That's a relatively obscure Beatles song. So
Right.
I'm okay if he does the more obscure stuff, but if it's the same old stuff over and over again, I'm tired of Hey Jude. I'm tired of Let It Be, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's.
He dusted off like in 2013. He did like Lovely Rita and things like that, and that was
Great.
pretty cool. To deeper stuff.
Great, great. That's what he
Right.
should be doing. That's
Right.
absolutely what he should be doing.
One of the other things Paul dealt with in the 80s too that kind of get a little frustrated with about, because he's always defending his role in the Beatles and then dealing with the fact, and you touched on it in the book, is Lennon all of a sudden, I mean, listen, it's not Paul's fault, it's not John's fault that he was shot, but he's all of a sudden he's a saint now. I mean, he was the Beatles. I mean, you saw this everywhere. John did everything, and Paul had to deal with that for a long time, and then now you see him defending himself in a lot of ways these last few decades, saying, no, I helped with that, I helped with this too.
But some people think it's petty.
Right.
Some people think it's petty.
Look, it happened. It's. I told you before. I came from Marvel Comics, and in the comic book industry, there are no two bigger giants, and in terms of collaboration, they were like the Lennon and McCartney of comics, with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Right.
And you look at the comments that they made over the years about who did what, and this guy did nothing, and I did everything, and all that. So it never got that bad between Lennon and McCartney, thankfully. But the fact of the matter is when you have contributed to the band as much as Paul did, and we know he did, and there is this tragedy that occurs, and yes, for a while, everybody is going to shift their focus to who the tragedy happened to, and stuff is going to get overblown.
The Martin Luther Lennon comment.
The Martin Luther Lennon thing. Absolutely. But then when it gets perpetuated, by writers like Philip Norman, who was really cruel. I mean, just really cruel. He has come around in recent years, at least where it comes to Paul. Towards George, not so much. I mean, he's pretty brutal to George. That's a whole other conversation. But you've got Philip Norman coming out with Shout, right on the heels of John's death, which paints Paul in a very bad light. And like I said, I read it when I was 12 years old. It didn't ring true to me back then, even not being a Beatles expert at the time. But then it gets perpetuated by Yoko, as late as 15, 20 years later, where she compares John to Amadeus Mozart, and she compares Paul to Salieri.
Yeah.
And then she wonders, and this is when Linda is dying.
Oh, and she didn't get the invite to the memorial.
Well,
right.
Linda apparently was furious, and this is a dying woman, and she had and she has to deal with her husband's ex-partner's wife saying these terrible things about her husband. Linda dies a short time later, and Yoko wonders why she wasn't invited to the memorial service. It's just stuff like that. He's dealt, he's very sensitive about that kind of thing, obviously. because he had to endure it for all of those years where John was elevated to such a level to sainthood and to being, what was it that Norman said? He was 3/4 of the Beatles.
Yeah, and that's just preposterous,
ridiculous.
One thing I want to bring up, which is kind of related to this, but it happens a little bit later. But you bring up, and which not a lot of people bring up in McCartney books. You did the McCartney clause that they found out about in the contract.
Oh yeah,
they found out about. They found out at the meeting at the Dorchester
when he
Hotel
resigns with Capitol.
No. They found out. They found out at the Dorchester Hotel in 1983 at a meeting, and they all walked out when they found out that McCartney was getting a higher percentage of the royalties. And they found out after John's death that this was happening, and which is why he didn't show up. And Glenn, I'll let you take it from there.
Right,
you touch upon it.
That was one of my must includes.
Yes,
because I felt it was a very important part of the story. When Paul saw, Paul had been at Columbia Records in the late. He signed with Columbia Records in the late 70s. It was the most lucrative record contract of that time up to that point. And then he decided not to renew with Columbia, so he was negotiating with Capitol to go back to Capitol Records. Part of his clause and part of that contract was he was going to get a higher royalty rate on all of his recordings, including the Beatles stuff. He was no longer a Beatle. Technically speaking, George, Ringo, and Yoko, as John's proxy, were no longer his bandmates. So he did not feel obligated to inform them that he was, getting a higher royalty rate. When they found out, they were really pissed off at him.
Yeah.
And they ended up suing him. And all of this stuff was still going on around the time when the Beatles were being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And at the last minute, everybody expected Paul to be there. He pulled out at the last minute and said, I can't be part of a phony Beatles reunion. When the fact of the matter is there are still very deep business differences between us.
Right. Well, I still think it's one of his big mistakes over his career, personally, just not to, put the business aside. It's one night. It's not really a reunion. You're accepting an award. You could have done what Fogerty did, before Fogerty got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with CCR and say, okay, you guys play. I'm not going to play. All right. I'll accept this award, but I won't play, and then you also put it in the book too. Yoko's comment that night too was like, well, John would have been here. John would have been here.
I'm with Paul on this one. Things were too touchy back then. I am all in favor of him not going, after the crap he got put through with the 3 against 1 in the 70s before. I totally get where he's coming from by not going to that thing. And you know what? And he negotiated something. He didn't have to tell them they weren't bandmates, like Glenn says. So what?
That was his defense. He said,
I'm not going.
Yeah, we haven't been in a band together for 15 years. I didn't feel like I'm obligated to let you know about my contract, my separate solo contract. You want a better deal with Capitol? Make a better deal with Capitol. Yeah, that was his attitude.
I'm with him on that.
Not wrong.
I know what you're saying, Tom. Just let bygones be bygones and just go.
It's one night. It's one night. You're just accepting an award. Next day, you're back to fighting again or whatever. Just I'm sure he's put on a fake smile many times before then. But are you aware of Glenn? Are you aware of the Chris Salavic interview where he talks about Yoko coming to him back in, I think it was like 73, and talking about him helping, going to talk to John and seeing if he wants to, go back to Yoko and stuff like that.
I wrote about it extensively in the John Lennon book because I felt it was important I felt it was much more important to John's story than it was to Paul's. So that's why I didn't have the room to get it. I didn't make the room to get into it in the McCartney book, just because, for Paul, it's just not as important to his story as it was to John's.
Right.
So yes, I'm more than well aware of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that.
I would have included it if I could have.
Right. But again, though, it's funny where, you can't even like mention his name in the John and Yoko story. I mean, that John and Yoko love story is just so powerful, and you cannot have Paul McCartney involved in that love story. You know what I mean? Or it just kind of like weakens the whole, perception of their relationship.
Until Yoko finally did publicly acknowledge it in around
Okay.
2010. I think she gave an
Okay.
interview with the New York Times. I think I don't.
Mm.
I told you facts and figures. I can't
Right.
sum them all up, but
Yeah.
it was for the New York Times, I believe, where Yoko did tell that story and basically confirmed
Okay.
everything that
Yeah.
Paul said.
So I missed that then. So that's
Mhm.
really cool. I'll
She
have to
finally
find
did
that.
acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Years
right.
and years and years and years later. Yeah.
Well, better late than never.
Another funny thing involving Paul and John. We've got the song "Too Many People,"
Mhm.
and the whole preaching practices now,
Mhm.
and you think Paul's doing this now with stuff like being involved with the vegetarianism and the Meat Free Mondays song and his PETA involvement, and then what the no landmine thing. I mean, is he kind of like maybe doing a little bit of that now?
I wouldn't say he's preaching practices, and I wouldn't. I mean, him being involved in causes goes back. Give Ireland back to the Irish.
Right.
So I think that he has his pet causes. I think he wants to raise awareness. Look, the '89 tour was sponsored by
Friends of the Earth.
Friends of the Earth.
Friends of the Earth. Yep.
He's always been that way. He tries to use his fame to get across issues and messages that have importance to him. I think nowhere near to the level that John and Yoko did in terms of in your face to the point where you do feel you're being preached to, and it was a bit obnoxious, and the self-righteousness. It's just funny. Just literally just the other day I was watching that infamous interview between John and Yoko and Gloria Emerson.
Oh, where they go at it and they call her phony and all that. Yeah, that's
from
a great
1969.
Yes.
Mhm.
And as much of a snob and much as upper crust and very sort of bourgeoisie that as Gloria Emerson came off, I was on her side. I felt that John and Yoko were coming off as obnoxious and naive and just unrealistic.
Probably the only reporter to get up and walk out on John and Yoko.
Yeah,
he did.
Yeah.
And she literally said, "Mrs. Lennon, you and I are just boring each other." And she
I'm
just
leaving. Bye.
Yeah. I think that Paul's a diplomat. He's always been a diplomat. He's a PR guy, and so he does get the stuff across, but he doesn't do it in a way that he's preaching practices where after a while you just get turned off to him. So that's he
doesn't shove it down your throat.
No.
Like John did it there for an intense period there. Power to the People. So, I mean, sometime in New York City, the whole freaking album. I mean, is it's in your face. Paul, picks and chooses where he's going to push an agenda, but I don't think it's like down your throat. And a lot of the time, like that heavy period, I think that he was doing that really the most would have been that off the ground period with all that big boys bickering.
Oh
all that
yeah,
other stuff.
Yeah.
Probably, but even then, that was just these are songs that were not. We know them because we're diehards, but they were not in the stream of consciousness of the public like a Sometime in New York City was, or even Give Ireland Back to the Irish.
Yeah, perhaps.
He wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't. He never latched on to sort of pithy slogans and put billboards.
The only time I ever thought he did a little of that is when he was with what's her face there. No more landmines. The landmines.
No more landmines. Yeah, Heather.
That to me was like. He's really pushing something that she wants. That's where he kind of seemed a little preachy to me. It's the only time I thought he became really preachy was when he was with her.
And not a cause that he would have been involved with otherwise. And the minute she was out of the picture, you didn't see him talking about landmines anymore.
No,
right.
But no, it's he does it in a way that's I personally was never got annoyed by any of it. And and there's a great bit in the book that he came out with last year, the lyrics.
Yep.
Where he's talking about when John and Yoko were putting up those billboards, war is over if you want it. And Paul's like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
That's BS.
Right.
And I was laughing. I laughed out loud when I read that because, it's silly. It's just so.
It's nice to see him be a little more humanistic and real for a change. When you and since just you think he'd say, oh, okay, whatever John says. He's like, you know what? It's not over.
Right.
It's not.
He doesn't. The way Paul supports his causes, he doesn't do it in a way that you can just punch holes right through it.
No.
And calling him naive and ridiculous, and you're wasting your time and mine, that kind of thing.
That kind of thing, right?
Which makes Gloria Emerson get up and walk out of an interview.
Such a classic interview. Wasn't that the one where she said, Yoko says, maybe if we just smile, everybody smiles, it'll just stop. That'll just stop the war if we just smile. And she's like, what?
Right. That is the one. Yeah. So no,
Okay. Have you spent much time with his other, like his classical work, the fireman work? Are you a classical fan, in a way?
I'm not a big classical person, but I listened to some of the fireman stuff, and some of it I like, some of it kind of left me cold. I try to, listen. I try to at least dabble in a little bit of everything that he does, but of the stuff that when he's branched out, I would say the classical stuff is the stuff I've listened to the least.
Okay, fair enough. You've done all this work now on Paul. You got the book, Paul at 80. We know you love the music. Mm-hmm. What else do you admire about Paul? What else about him do you think stands out?
I think that he has proven himself to be, especially when you consider the line of work that he's in, a model husband and a model father. And that means a lot. I mean, that has nothing to do with the work, but you're asking me besides the work,
right.
I think he is to be admired for just setting a great standard for, having a show business career and just keeping your personal life together,
personal. Yeah.
Personal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Right.
Keeping your personal life together and personal. Right. He just, it's, I remember when Pete Townsend was going through his divorce, and one of the things he said was, because I so admire Paul McCartney for the marriage. I so admire him just for his marriage alone, that he was able to make it work and I couldn't.
Yeah.
Interesting.
True. All true.
Right. Well, it's been out for a little while now. It's time. Paul McCartney at 80. Glenn, it's been a blast talking with you. Do you have anything else in the works that you want to talk about? Is there anything you want to plug at the moment? Anything else you're working on?
Nothing to plug at the. Oh well, I mean, I could tell you that my the Star Wars bookazine is out there as well. Time special edition, the story of Star Wars. That came out just a few weeks before the McCartney book, so that's still out there. And I am 3 chapters into my next one. I don't think I can talk about the topic yet.
That's fine. That's fine.
But once I can, believe me, you won't be able to shut me up.
Great. Well, Andy and I are both big Star Wars geeks. We were just, rambling on about the Obi-Wan Kenobi, show on Disney Plus, and our thoughts about that. I mean, did you watch it?
I did watch it. What did
you think?
I thought overall, it was very well done. I felt that the writer in me is always sort of like thinking about ways you could do it better. Mm-hmm. So there were a couple of things that I would have done a little differently, but overall, for what it was, I thought it was very enjoyable and definitely worthy of the name Star Wars.
Especially the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, the last 2. You mentioned the writer and you always wanting to find a way to do it better. Do you do that to yourself as well?
Oh yeah. Once especially once it's out of my system and I revisit my work,
Mm,
sometimes years later. I'm always editing myself, thinking about, oh my God, why did I have the character say that when he should have said that? Or
mm,
why did I phrase it this way when I could have phrased it that way? So yeah, uh, when when it's still fresh, I'm still so connected to it that I don't see it. But when time has
mm,
passed and I can be more objective, yeah, I'm as hard on myself as anybody.
mm. You seem to be really busy at the moment. Are you happy with where your career's been headed these last few years?
Oh yeah, I'm getting to
Mm,
write about stuff that I'm genuinely loving, or and have
mm-hmm.
loved for a very long time. It's definitely within my wheelhouse. So in that respect, in terms of the journalistic stuff that I do, it's great. I have a 9 to 5 job that I enjoy quite a bit. In Like I said, in marketing, as a marketing copywriter, and so I definitely am what I feel is in a good place, and
Mm-hmm.
enjoying what I'm doing, and I hope to keep doing it. Yeah, there's a bunch of topics that I think would be
Right.
very timely for next year that I hope I'll be able
Mm-hmm.
to write about in bookazine form.
Cool. Well, let's be happy that you had another choice besides Tom Selleck, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have my if that was my only choice, my
right.
freelance career would have gone in a very different
There we go.
direction. Yeah.
Of course. Andy, anything you got going on with your other channel, and plug away, my friend?
Not much. Only the most recent episode on Andy's Music Vault was my latest episode on Yes, which dropped the other day. But by the time this one up, we might have another one posted by that. So that's Andy's Music Vault, the other leg. So check that one out.
Okay, cool. And then, I've got my other show, Talk More Talk, which I do with Kid O'Toole, Ken Michaels, and Mean Mr. Mayo, Joe Mayo. And our last episode was for Ringo's birthday. We did 5 songs that we think are undervalued or underrated, but it's from the 2000s on. So we're going to be talking about a lot of recent stuff that maybe a lot of casual fans might not know from Ringo. So yeah, check that out. That's Talk More Talk. That's on YouTube. So please head over there and check it out and subscribe if you like what you see and hear. So that's going to do it for us, Glenn. We want to thank you very much for coming in and talking about this wonderful book that you did here, the Time Magazine, Paul McCartney at 80. It's some good stuff. And listen, it's even for a hardcore fan, I mean, it's still enjoyable. You're still reading about the person that we love, Paul McCartney. So check it out. And for us, for Two Legs, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Two Legs Podcast. You can email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. Find our YouTube channel, please. If you just listen to the audio version of this show, if you want to check out the live show that we've been doing on Wednesdays. That's again, that's Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. And guys, it's been great hanging out with you. Andy, Glenn, I'm Tom, and as always, everybody out there, have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care.